I was diagnosed with anorexia. My family, we're faith-based. I come from the Jewish community. I knew that I was struggling with something, but again, I didn't know what it was. My eating disorder also did not look like what I had read about in a textbook. And then about 2 weeks later, I was sent not only to a residential center, but to an inpatient facility, to a hospital, because it had gotten that bad. It was really tough. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. And while I was in treatment, I met, as I mentioned, Kendra Williams, the original Blackbird. And this young woman was very different than I was, but we connected so deeply. We realized that we both didn't know how to exist. We didn't want to die, but we didn't want to live, or we didn't know how to live. We felt paralyzed.
Hi, Alexandra. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you, Mark?
Great. Now that you're here, I am so excited to talk to you. You are the founder of Project Blackbird. What is Project Blackbird?
Yeah. So Project Blackbird is an organization that I started a couple years ago. It is based around a film called Blackbird. That film is based around a young woman. Her name is Kendra Williams. We called her Blackbird. It's based on my own true story and her true story when we met back at a treatment center in 2018. It was an eating disorder treatment center. And since then, we have founded an organization that not only tours this film, but uses that film as a platform to engage different communities, students, and underserved populations in the mental health space to help them see themselves on screen. And it opens up a conversation where we try to destigmatize that mental health conversation. We connect those audiences with resources, and then ultimately we pay for free therapy for these student audiences for a full year so that they can get started on their journey for mental health.
Wow. Wow. Tell us about your journey through this. Because you said the movie was based on your real life experiences.
It is. So myself, back in 2018, I was diagnosed with anorexia. I had no idea that I had an eating disorder. I went though to seek help because I knew that there was something wrong. That being said, it was not something that was talked about in my community. My family, we're faith-based. I come from the Jewish community, also the South American community. It's not popular. It's not necessarily safe to talk about mental health struggles. It's not okay in those communities all the time to say that you're not okay. And you hear messages like, well, God will fix it. Or, just we'll get help, but don't say it outside of the household. You hear a lot of those kind of messaging. And so for me, I knew that I was struggling with something, but again, I didn't know what it was. My eating disorder also did not look like what I had read about in a textbook. When I was in high school, I read that anorexia, you weren't eating. Well, I was still having 3 meals a day. So I had no idea truly that I was struggling with an eating disorder specifically, but I knew that something was wrong. So I went to get help from a psychiatrist. They said, have you considered possibly treatment? And at the time I laughed. I thought, that's ridiculous. I don't need treatment. And then about 2 weeks later, I was sent not only to a residential center, but to an inpatient facility, to a hospital, because it had gotten that bad. I was sent there to refeed my body to get to the point where I was then able to go to a residential treatment center. So I was in treatment for about 8 months total. I had no idea that that was going to be the trajectory of my experience, of my treatment experience. And I always say that it was a blessing and a curse. It was really tough. I'm open and honest about my time in treatment. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. I had no idea what I was getting into, but it was also a blessing because it taught me that I really was not okay. And in order for things to get better, they had to get worse for a little time. And while I was in treatment, I met, as I mentioned, Kendra Williams, the original Blackbird, who is still a very, very dear friend of mine. And she's a partner in Project Blackbird. And this young woman was very different than I was. She looked different than I did. She acted different than I did, very different personality. She had a very different family, community, background, experiences, trauma. All of those were so different from what I had experienced and who I was. But we connected so deeply in treatment and we realized that we were more alike than we could have imagined. And to detail Kendra Williams a little bit and her experiences, like I mentioned, different pasts, different traumas, she was very quiet, did not speak a word to anybody in treatment. And I was very, very outspoken, very outgoing. I wanted to know what was happening with everyone and how to help everyone. And ironically, both of these were ways for us individually to deflect from our own pain. I put it outside elsewhere, and she shut down and didn't speak to anybody. She and I were so different, but we connected when we realized that we both didn't know how to exist. We almost felt paralyzed. We didn't want to, I'll just be blunt, we didn't want to die, but we didn't want to live, or we didn't know how to live. We felt paralyzed. And when we connected on that deep, deep theme, we realized that we were so similar as humans. We realized that there were so many other communities, underserved communities out there that experience these similar feelings, but don't talk about it in their family, in their circle. And so that was my experience. That's why I bring to the table now Project Blackbird to these different universities, different communities, so that we can connect.
What a powerful story. I only have about 1,000 questions about it. I want to go back to the time when you said that you were eating 3 meals a day. You didn't fit the textbook definition of what an anorexic girl looks like.
Yes.
If somebody is listening to this and perhaps going through the same journey as you are, can you tell us more about how it was determined you were anorexic, even
Yeah.
though you were eating multiple meals a day? What was
Absolutely.
exactly going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that we talk about a lot on tour. Our moderator, Paula Edwards Gayfield, she has been an expert really in this field and in this space for a very long time. And when she leads the conversation, she'll often say, what does an eating disorder look like? We'll look around the room because it's anyone and everyone. An eating disorder does not discriminate. And so I start by saying that because one, an eating disorder does not, or anorexia specifically, does not mean that you're in a thin body. Now, for myself, that is how it was ultimately, I guess, not diagnosed, but that was kind of what sent me to the treatment center to begin with. I was fortunate enough that I lost a lot of weight. And I say fortunate enough because many individuals, if your BMI is not a certain BMI, if you're not underweight enough, your insurance won't cover you to go to treatment, which is terrible. Because now what I know is that an eating disorder actually has very little to do with your BMI. That might be a symptom of an eating disorder. You lose weight. Some people don't. And the sad reality is you are going through exactly the same behaviors one way or another. Your body just reacts and responds differently depending on what body you have. So I was fortunate enough that my body responded in that manner so that it triggered the alerts of the treatment centers. And they said, okay, this young woman needs help. But there are many individuals out there that their bodies don't respond in the same manner. So to answer your question, that's kind of how I was sent in. My body did respond in that manner. I was losing weight very quickly. My story, I was eating still 3 meals a day, but I was in what most people are in, which is a comparison mindset. I was looking at everybody around me to determine what was the right thing for me. So I saw other women on a greens diet. I saw other women counting calories. I saw other women exercising. Now, exercising can be a very positive thing. But for me, I come from a family, we all have a very fast metabolism. We're not a family of real runners or exercise. I had never run in my life. And I started working out 3 times a week. I won't name the exact name of it. It's wonderful for some people, but it was one of those high intensity, interval training, something that I did not need at the time. And I was going 3 times a week very compulsively. And I was counting my calories and I was cutting out carbs. And I thought I was doing all of these things that were good for me because that's what I saw my friends doing. That's what I saw others around me doing. But I was still having my 3 meals a day. And so I thought, how in the world could I be struggling with an eating disorder when I'm feeding myself 3 times a day? So I just was in a comparison mode where I wasn't really listening to me. I wasn't listening to those hunger cues in my body, those pangs that were saying, keep eating, keep going. You're not full yet for lunch. Keep going. But I would say, just wait till dinner. Just wait till dinner. You can do it. You can wait till dinner. And those messages, it was awful. I remember day after day just thinking, 1 more hour, you can do it. 1 more hour, you can do it. And I'd see that clock hit 5 p.m. and then I would go. But I wasn't allowed. I was setting all of these rules for myself that I thought were healthy and appropriate. And quite sadly, I just wasn't listening to me.
So when you mentioned a little bit earlier about, some people lose weight and they're lucky because then the insurance covers them. Some people, they don't lose weight. But
Yeah.
you said some of the behaviors are the same. What are some of these behaviors? Is it the obsession over looking a certain way or looking like someone else?
There are numerous reasons that somebody might develop an eating disorder, but there are also numerous ways that it could manifest. What you speak of and allude to, the body image. that can be a piece of it. Body image, it can be body dysmorphia. You might, when you, there are different ways that it can manifest. I'll start with that. We know of anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, ARFID, which is restrictive, avoidant restrictive. So you're avoiding specific foods. Maybe it's specific textures, specific food groups, whatever it is. But I should say bulimia, anorexia. There are different psychological and physiological impacts that those two have on the body and on the mind. And so your mind will start to fire neurons differently. You're not as present. You experience brain fog, irritability, your mood changes. And then on top of that, when you speak about body dysmorphia, a piece of that is also linked to, well, your brain is no longer functioning as your brain should because it's not getting the nutrients it needs for whatever reason. Either you're not providing it with the nutrients or you're not keeping those nutrients in, but whatever the reason, it's not getting the proper nutrients to function appropriately. So body dysmorphia could be a piece of it, body image, as you say. And one thing that I'll say on that note is I would love for our society to start looking at body image a little bit differently. A lot of people will allude to an eating disorder as a vanity disease. And if an eating disorder is a vanity disease for somebody, so be it. But what if we look at that differently and say, how sad and how hurtful is that we live in a world where someone feels that they need to look a certain way to be loved, accepted, connected. Instead of thinking of vanity as a bad thing, why don't we think of it as something that we want to care for? Because if somebody's feeling that way, there's a reason. The other piece, though, a lot of times it's trauma based. We will hear a lot of individuals in treatment saying, I don't deserve, or I'm not worth that. We think badly of ourselves. We're speaking badly to ourselves. There are so many reasons that an eating disorder could come about, and so many different ways that it manifests. And as you also mentioned, planning, thinking about food all the time. When food starts to control you, starts to consume you, we see that in binge eating disorder as well, anorexia, bulimia, all of these. Food has kind of taken control of our life and has started to define who we are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to your point, when you said that if you are trying to look a certain way so that you are worthy of love and so that you can be in a relation, someone loves you. There are so many people, and if that is considered a vanity, disorder, that's so unfair because there's so many people who bend themselves in a pretzel in a relationship that they shouldn't be in, abusive, physical, or mental, just to be loved. Right. That's so unfair to be called that way, right?
Yes.
As I understand, Project Blackbird's mission is twofold. Number one, to help individuals identify that they might be suffering with an issue that they may not understand they have in the first place, much like your story. And then to spread awareness at a larger scale so that more help is available for those who are struggling. So if I am listening to this and I am in a place where you were several years ago, where you don't even know that you have anorexia, right? What are some things that you would, but I'm curious. I know I eat sometimes and I throw up from time to time because I feel look a certain way, or there are some things that I know that I'm doing that is controlling the intake or expulsion of food. But I don't believe that I have an eating disorder, right? What are some things would you say I must consider about myself, even start thinking about if I need help or not?
Yeah, I would say, and this gets really tough. I don't want to be here to say that somebody does or doesn't have an eating disorder. I think that there's kind of this fine line between an eating disorder and disordered eating. We see the keto diet. We see, all of these different diets. Diet culture is a form of disordered eating and can lead to an eating disorder. So I don't want to tell somebody that they do or don't have an eating disorder, but I would say if food and the way that you eat or consume food, if it is causing you distress, be it planning, inability to connect with friends, family, inability to go out. Personally, I'd say if it's taking up brain space that could be dedicated towards something much more productive and much more fulfilling, then get help. And you don't have to label it even, I think, as an eating disorder. Just get curious and get help, because I think it's such a rewarding thing to have freedom in your own mind and to really put your time and energy and brain into something that's fulfilling to you and actually makes you happy, versus having these spiraling thoughts or putting all of these rules on yourself. So if it's causing any kind of distress, I would say get help. And that help might even just be find a therapist and talk about that and process that a bit.
Yeah, I think that's the key. If you know that you are in distress of whatsoever kind, might as well seek consultation with a therapist and just
Yeah.
make sure things are okay.
Yeah.
Because we've ought to take care of ourselves the most. And like you said, you know, you might be in a culture, in a society, in a group of people who may or may not notice it or even
Yeah.
ignore it if they notice it. So at the end of the day, we are responsible for our own lives and the
Absolutely.
well-being of it.
And
Let's talk about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, well, I was just going to say, so that's why the organization actually decided that the real tangible impact that we could have was paying for therapy for these students for a full year, because we figured at the very least in year one, if your family, if your community is not a safe space to talk about these kind of things, we want to first show you that, yes, there are others in your community that struggle just like you do. Everybody struggles with something. But that being said, we know that it's not immediately going to be a safe space to talk about. So can we just help provide a therapist at no cost for a year, just a safe person to talk to about what's going on? And at the very least, we feel that that's a good place to start. And if more treatment is needed, maybe that's something that the therapist can discuss as well with that individual. So that's our hope, is to get someone started there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let me ask you this question. As someone who is not living in this universe, right? As someone who's living outside of this universe, an observer, you know, anorexia, bulimia, any eating disorder, the only connection the average person has with it is if they read something about it on a magazine or watch it on television.
Right.
We are made to believe that there is enough programs out there to be able to help people, right? The fact that you're bringing up that there are no programs out there is kind of shocking.
Yeah. And I don't think, I shouldn't say, and I don't want to say that there are no programs out there. There are actually wonderful resources out there. One of the things that we do with our program is at every school, we set up a resource fair in the back of the room. So we're not trying to compete with any resources. We're actually trying to bring the community together, bring these resources together. So what we do is we set up a resource fair in the back of the room with 10 to 15 local, national, and college campus resources. Right now, we partner officially with NAMI, with Maybelline's Brave Together, and with Talkspace. And those three are always present at the events. But then we also include local resources, some resources that are specific to different communities, some resources that help subsidize treatment, and then college campus resources. We are aware that these students are in college. They have some resources on campus, but a lot of them don't know that the resources are there. And the student health services have trouble reaching the students. So this is kind of just a way to say, hey, now that we have your attention, now that we have used this film, used this panel conversation with your hero, with an NFL player, with an actor, a celebrity, now that we've shown you that your heroes struggle too, we've opened your mind to see someone from your own community struggling and realize that maybe you do as well. Now that we have opened up that can of worms, now let's help make this a little bit less overwhelming and safer for you by connecting you with the resources, by helping you with the therapy. So it's not that there are no programs out there, but there's not a program out there right now that brings the community of resources together, brings them to the students. And I also think that what we do that has a little bit of magic, one, the film, and two, the conversation. So the film that we bring is a narrative film. It's not a documentary. And I think that that's important to recognize, because with a documentary, you're learning something about someone else or about something else. And there's always kind of this distance that's put, I think, between the viewer and the information. And you finish this documentary and you've learned something wonderful, but it's almost this mindset of, okay, well, that's them and that's awful, or that's interesting, or that's amazing. But then this is me and I step back into my own world. But when you watch a narrative film, you find yourself getting lost in the character. For example, you watch a film about a crime and all of a sudden you're speaking in legal jargon. You know, you find yourself talking like you are the lawyer and you get lost in these characters' worlds. And so when we play Blackbird, you find yourself getting lost in this character of Blackbird and you empathize with her in a way that you wouldn't in a documentary. And I think that's the magic that this film has as we take it on tour. And that's the magic that narrative film has, is we allow these audience members to actually start to see themselves in the position of that character. They empathize with the disorder in a very different way. And you realize that it's so much more than the food. There's so much that lies behind a mental health disorder of any nature. Addiction, you know, it's not just what they are addicted to. There's so much behind it. There's so much pain behind it. And there's a reason. And so that's powerful. And then I think having the conversation myself the original Blackbird, we always sit on the panel. So we just talk authentically about our own struggles. They see themselves on stage. If they're from a community that both of us are a part of, they can see themselves on stage. And then we bring an NFL player into the picture, a man saying, I struggle, and that's okay. That's a part of the human experience. We see young men in the audience then look at them, see themselves. And I mean, I've had so many boys in the audience say, I have never, ever thought about journaling. Can I take a couple journals? Can I journal at home? I've had men say to me, I'm consumed about food all the time. I mean, I have this gym routine where I go to the gym and then I have to eat these certain macros and I'm obsessed and I'm consumed. And I never thought that that could be an eating disorder. And, you know, and I'll say to them, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but is it consuming you? Do you have stress over it? Then explore it. We're just here to explore because we are all human. And this is part of the human experience is we are beautiful, but complex brains. So I think that's the magic of it. And that's what makes it unique.
I love it. When it comes to this whole journey, when I'm thinking about somebody who's listening to this, number one is awareness. We
Yeah.
spoke about the awareness aspect of it. The second aspect is the stigma. You spoke a little bit about the stigma. The third, I think there is fear of the process. Right?
Yeah.
And I want to clarify something because you said when you were under therapy, when you were in rehab, when you were there for 8 months or so, you said one of the best things that happened is also one of the worst things that happened. Can
Yeah.
you clarify that a little bit?
I will. And this is something that's important to me specifically. And I know how controversial this is. And I very much champion treatment for the individuals where treatment is the right fit for. I never want to dictate or inform what is the right path for an individual. But I also want to be very honest about what worked and what didn't work for me. So I will say treatment for me, it taught me a lot about what I was doing to my body from a health standpoint. It taught me a lot about how to kind of normalize eating for me. And I may have been in a place where I really needed that. I might not have honestly survived without treatment. That being said, it was also an experience for me that shapes now how I think about food that can be hurtful to me now. And I guess to explain that a little bit further, the treatment that I went to, the treatment center that I went to, one, I was there for 8 months. It was a very long time. It connected me in ways that I couldn't imagine were possible to those around me in treatment, but it also disconnected me in ways from others in society. When I stepped out, I was thinking in a deeper way than many individuals, which scared me. But then I also was more connected to others that thought in that deeper way as well. I was more, I had discovered so much about myself that I wasn't able to ignore anymore. What was difficult for me from an eating disorder standpoint, it's very rules based. I was taught to eat in exchanges. So an exchange being one carb exchange would be maybe a piece of bread or half a cup of rice and, a fat exchange and a protein exchange. Well, my mind, because I was in that environment for so long, it's very difficult for me to eat a meal now without seeing it in certain exchanges. And so as desperate as I am to not let food have any power over me, my honesty is I still have so much trouble looking at a meal without seeing macros, without seeing exchanges, because it was almost ingrained into my mind. And I developed, I guess, not fears, but attitudes towards certain or feelings towards certain food groups that I didn't have before. So, for example, desserts. I loved desserts. I did not have any fear of desserts. I didn't have a thought in my mind about a dessert. But when you go to treatment and you're around other men and women who do have a fear of a dessert, well, your brain then clocks, okay, maybe I should be afraid of sweets, or maybe I should be afraid. You start to almost adopt other behaviors that were not your behaviors to begin with. That's something that I can process on my own too, and that's always, I accept every battle and challenge and trigger as something that I just now have to work through. It's an opportunity to work through something greater. There's always something more I can work on, but I will say it made it a little bit difficult for me following treatment, and I still have trouble with that. So yeah, that's just my honesty around it. And I want to always be as authentic as I can as I progress and as I move forward with Project Blackbird. I'm never going to say a day in my life that I don't struggle if I am struggling. And I'm never going to sugarcoat anything. I want to tell it like it is. And I want others to be able to make the decision for themselves, what feels right for me.
No, I mean, thank you so much for your honesty and vulnerability and coming out and saying that. But I think it was probably one of the pivotal moments in this conversation because a lot of us who struggle through stuff look at others who have gone through some type of therapy, some type of rehab, and just believe, well, that person is fixed. Person no longer has that issue. There's something just wrong with me because I still feel a certain way despite having gone that. And but the reality is that almost everyone who has gone through this journey, even though they are better off, much better off, chances are there are some remnants of that experience that lingers with them.
Absolutely.
Because to say that we live a life of perfection where we have overcome whatever, difficulties and challenges we face through, that's just a lie, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's what separates you mostly than everybody else, because I've heard stories like this before. And even though it wasn't explicitly said, it was always insinuated that they have achieved some level of perfection, right? And you see this in Hollywood all the time with actors who abuse drugs and then they claim that they're completely healed. Only
Right.
10 years from then they have OD'd, right? You are bringing truth to the matter that it's a curve, it's a grading, it's not white and black, it's shades of gray.
Yeah.
And
100%.
we're constantly forever trying to get better. And someday we hope we get to the perfection state of no issues whatsoever, but that shouldn't, deter anybody from starting the process.
Yeah, 100%. And I actually think I think the more that we can be honest about that when that recovery is not linear, when we start to feel it coming back, it really does start to take the power away from it. And I'll say, I mean, I have coming and going thoughts all the time, and when I do have a thought of restriction, I'm annoyed by it, and I tell it that I'm annoyed by it. I'm like, what in the world are you doing in my head right now? It doesn't serve me. It just doesn't serve me anymore. And yeah, and it's really frustrating. And I mean, beyond frustrating, I will have moments where I am debilitatingly anxious, where I am sobbing the entire day. But then I look at it and I almost have this conversation of what purpose is this serving right now? And do I need to hold on to that right now? Do I need to hold on to that restriction, that fear, that X, Y, Z? I talk myself through it now, but you can't talk yourself through it if you don't admit that it's happening.
Not only that, but also if you haven't built up some muscles in learning how to talk yourself through it in the first place. For
100%.
someone who hasn't gone through a therapy process, who hasn't been confronted,
Yeah.
and haven't kind of confronted themselves, they shouldn't be trying to talk themselves out of it on their own, right?
Yeah.
They should reach out and seek help if they think they need help, and then perhaps build up those muscles so that they can do it to themselves later on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's almost like your partner in crime, your therapist. It's someone that is just on your side. That's it. That just wants you to be the best and happiest version of you.
So let's talk about Project Blackbird a little bit more. I mean, you have an amazing cause at your hands. Not a cause that you just woke up and decided to champion because you read a book, but because a cause that you suffered through yourself. Through suffering comes wisdom. The knowledge that we learn through suffering is so much greater than just something that we just dreamed of. Right. And
Yeah.
now the passion that you're putting into Project Blackbird, it's amazing. You're partnering with companies, you have an enormous goal that you're pursuing to provide therapy for college students for a year. What are some challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, well, we definitely have a few. I would say the two biggest challenges for me, one, it is very difficult. It has been very difficult, but also a wonderful experience and opportunity. It's been very difficult being a leader that is so open about struggling. And that is what I put on myself because I sometimes have this imposter syndrome walking in the room. Well, how can I be the CEO of this highly successful company, but I am putting out there so vulnerably that I am struggling right now, in this moment. And talking myself through that process and really saying, I am going to set the precedence for what a real leader is like. And a real leader is human and authentic and honest. And that was a big challenge in the beginning. It's starting to become honestly much easier the more I run this organization and the more I go on. But that was a huge challenge for me in the beginning, just reshaping my mindset around that. And then actually the two other real challenges that we have, one, reaching some of the schools. You would think every school that we connect with wants to bring this program on board, but it is very difficult to reach high schools, especially. It's different school districts, different school boards, different schools and departments within colleges who is able to fund this. And we keep it as low as possible in terms of funding, but we need help, bringing this on. And so outreach to different foundations, getting connected with the foundations, connected with the schools, that's hard, but something that we just push even harder for. And of course, once we do connect with the schools, they are eager to bring this program on. So that part has been really nice that we've had a lot of support there. The last bit that is really challenging is funding the free therapy also. I have committed to it, and it is something that I will not go back on. I will provide free therapy for a year for every student that wants it in that audience. And it doesn't matter if they have insurance or if they don't. But I rely on donors for that. Donors, foundations, trusts, individuals that really care about these kids having access to free therapy. And I've had some kind of funny pushback occasionally. I've had a school or two say, well, we provide 5 therapy sessions. And to be able to explain to them, one, 5 is not enough. Two, these students go home over summer and winter break. And let me name a couple of triggers for mental health. Family, we love them, but family can be a huge trigger. And holidays. You go home and it's Thanksgiving and Christmas. And when you turn not only to an eating disorder, but if you want to, if you want to touch on the eating disorder specifically, how difficult and how challenging is a holiday that is based around food? And now you're also stepping away from your college community. You're going home. You're now under the care of your parents. When you've been independent for so long, you're trying to establish your own identity and your own belonging. I mean, there's so much in there. And now you don't have the help of the school. How can the school help support that? Bring in Project Blackbird, bring in this opportunity for them to have free therapy when they go home. We want to give the schools these resources when they're not able to provide them on campus. So that's been a challenge, is just funding that whole initiative. And I hope that the more that we go on this year, the more that people find out about us, that the more that foundations find out about us, that they can help to support to continue helping this to happen and helping us to bring this to different college campuses and different high schools.
Absolutely. I mean, until the point you started describing some of the reasons why people don't want this to be coming in, I couldn't even think of one. Because it seems like a slam dunk type of cause to
To me
find, because,
too. Yes.
I mean, you were
Thank you
talking
for
about
saying it.
holidays and the stress that food brings. I mean, summertime, it's like it's beach and,
Yes.
no clothes, and looking certain has an effect on that. Is anything happening at a governmental level?
We're doing a lot of outreach right now. Right now, we have a campaign, a funding campaign going out. We do a lot of outreach to different foundations. Again, we're submitting to a lot of grants. That's a whole other process. Grants take a long time. And unfortunately, for a newer organization, a lot of grant givers, they're incredible. They are so supportive. But to organizations that have existed a little bit longer, it's very challenging as a newer organization to get the support of grants. So we're breaking in there. Fortunately, we have the support of NAMI, which is an organization that has existed for a little bit longer than we have. So finding kind of ways, how can we navigate through that? But yes, there's a lot of support available from a government standpoint. It's just about reaching the right decision makers.
So if someone's listening to this and they want to get involved, obviously one of the simplest ways could be possibly through donation, right? What are some other ways that they can get involved with you and support this project?
Yeah, ways to get involved outside of donating themselves would be, one, if you're connected yourself with an organization, government organization, foundation, if you're connected with a school, anybody in a school can be that first person to open the door for us. It could be a professor. It could be somebody that is involved with a club or organization. It could be somebody that works for student affairs, that works with orientation spaces, anybody, student health services, anyone from a school. Connecting us would be incredible. If you are a public figure of sorts that wants to speak and share your voice on a panel, if you know a public figure that wants to share their voice on a panel that has struggled with mental health themselves, that could be a huge influence and role model for these students as we go on tour, we would love to be connected with them. And then just sharing the organization with friends, with family. There is always somebody that you could share this with, that could sit in our audience, that could be a student, that could bring us to their community, to an underserved population. It's not always schools, it's also communities. So really, I think no matter who you are, there's a way that you could help and support this organization. Just connect with us and connect us to somebody who could help or who could need the help that we're providing.
Well, Alexandra, this show is called Peak Performance. And peak performance doesn't happen without optimal mental health, optimal physical health, optimal relationship with self and others.
Absolutely.
You went through a lot in your life. You had the choice to go through therapy, come out on the other side, go back to your life, live a good life, and perhaps keep the continuing struggle under the wraps. But you didn't do that. Despite having a full-time job to support yourself, you have now overextended yourself behind a cause to help others with no gain to yourself. And that speaks volumes about the kind of person you are. So it is nothing but an honor and a privilege to be able to meet you, to be able to talk to you, to be able to understand your story and your mission. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience?
One, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this conversation, for supporting this, for supporting us, but also all of the conversations that you have. I mean, I told you before, I love going down the rabbit hole of interviews that you do. I think you are brilliant and incredible and very well-rounded and holistic with your approach too. You really tackle every angle. So thank you first and foremost for what you do, for providing this platform. And then the one last bit that I will say to touch on performance, I think by opening my mind up to allowing myself to be human and allowing myself to struggle, I've been able to address my own mind as mine, as an individual's. I have stopped or tried to stop comparing myself so much to others, and I've become much more intuitive. And through becoming more intuitive, that is what has guided this nonprofit to be what it is today, is really instead of waiting for someone else to do it, I have set my own precedents. I have become my own leader. I have improved my own performance by just getting to know myself and listening to my intuition. And I think that is the magic of allowing yourself to be authentic, of leaning into mental health and leaning into what you might struggle with. You will come out on top. You will come out stronger. And success is inevitable from there, because if success is happiness, you will find that happiness. You will find fulfillment. So I hope that someone else can really start to lean into their own intuition and their own authenticity as well.
Absolutely. Be the change you want to see in the world, and that's exactly what you're doing.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mark.
so much, Alexandra. Thank you so much. Pause here.